Matt Barnes raised the ball as if he was going to throw it directly at Kobe Bryant's face. A fake, a test, the kind of move players use to make their opponents flinch, to get in their heads, to expose a crack in their composure. Barnes had done it before. It had worked before. Players blinked. Players stepped back. Players revealed in that half-second of instinctive reaction that no matter how tough they appeared, somewhere deep down they were still human, still wired to protect themselves, still capable of being rattled. Kobe didn't move. Not a millimeter, not a blink, not a breath. His eyes stayed locked on Barnes with the kind of stillness that isn't natural, that has to be built, layer by layer, over thousands of hours of training your mind to be somewhere most people simply cannot reach. Barnes stood there holding the ball mid-motion, staring at a man who had just looked directly at a ball flying toward his face and decided, on some fundamental level, that he simply did not care. The arena saw it, the cameras caught it, and in that single frozen moment, before the play even continued, everyone watching understood that something had just happened that went far beyond a basketball game. Matt Barnes had tried to get inside Kobe Bryant's head, and what he found there was nothing. Not bravado, not aggression, not performance, nothing. A void where fear was supposed to be. That moment became one of the most replayed clips in NBA history, not because of what happened on the scoreboard, but because of what it revealed about the human mind at its absolute limit. And to understand why it hit the way it did, you have to understand who these two men were, where they came from, and what was really at stake that night. Matt Barnes arrived in the NBA the hard way. Undrafted out of UCLA in 2002, cut multiple times, bouncing between rosters and development leagues, Barnes built his career entirely on toughness. Not skill alone, not athleticism alone, but the specific kind of mental and physical aggression that makes certain players invaluable to a team even when their stats don't jump off the page. Barnes was the enforcer type. The player coaches deployed when they needed someone to get under an opponent's skin, to make the game feel like a street fight, to shift the psychological terrain of a contest from technical to emotional. He'd learned early that if you could make someone react, if you could provoke them into anger or hesitation or distraction, you had already won something important before the ball even went through the net. He was genuinely tough. There was nothing fake about it. Barnes had grown up in Santa Ana, California, in circumstances that didn't forgive softness. He'd fought for everything he had in basketball, every roster spot, every contract, every minute of playing time. He had the kind of edge that comes from knowing that if you don't impose yourself on a situation, the situation will impose itself on you. And that edge made him dangerous, made him effective, made him the kind of player who could disrupt the rhythm of opponents who were technically superior. The fake was his signature move. He'd used it against dozens of players throughout his career. Most of them flinched. Most of them stepped back. Most of them gave Barnes exactly what he wanted. Kobe Bryant was not most players. To understand what made Kobe different, you have to understand the Mamba mentality, not as a catchphrase, not as a branding exercise, but as a genuine psychological system that Kobe built and refined over the course of his entire life. It started when he was a kid in Italy, where his father Joe Bryant played professional basketball after his NBA career ended. Young Kobe spent hours alone in gymnasiums, not because someone made him, but because the game consumed him in a way that felt less like obsession and more like identity. He wasn't practicing to get better. He was practicing to become someone who couldn't be rattled, someone who couldn't be moved, someone who had visited every possible version of failure and pressure and adversity in his mind so many times that when it appeared in reality, it felt familiar rather than threatening. By the time Kobe entered the NBA at 17, he had already developed a relationship with pressure that most players never achieve in their entire careers. He sought it out. He manufactured it in practice by creating scenarios that were harder than anything he'd face in a real game, so that real games felt easier by comparison. He would practice free throws while exhausted, imagining the entire season came down to this shot. He would run defensive drills at the end of brutal workouts when his legs had nothing left, so that the final minutes of close games became a familiar place rather than a terrifying one. The goal was always the same: make the impossible feel routine, make the threatening feel ordinary. The flinch response Barnes was counting on is one of the most primitive reactions in the human nervous system. When something moves rapidly toward your face, your body reacts before your conscious mind has time to process what's happening. It's not weakness, it's neurology. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for threat detection, fires faster than conscious thought. Professional athletes work for years to suppress this response, to create space between stimulus and reaction, but very few ever eliminate it entirely. Barnes had tested enough players to know that even the great ones, even the ones with reputations for mental toughness, would show something in that moment. A micro-flinch, a slight lean backward, a blink, something. What he encountered with Kobe was different in kind, not just in degree. The look in Kobe's eyes during that moment has been analyzed extensively. Players who were on the court that night have talked about it in interviews for years. There was no suppression happening. Suppression implies effort, implies that something was being held back. What Kobe showed was the absence of a threat response at all, as if his nervous system had simply processed the incoming ball as irrelevant information and filed it accordingly. Matt Barnes later admitted in interviews that it was the most unsettling thing he'd ever experienced on a basketball court. Not because Kobe said anything, not because he reacted aggressively, but because he didn't react at all. You expect a predator to show its teeth. You don't expect it to yawn. The game that followed told the rest of the story. The Lakers and the Orlando Magic were in a period of intense rivalry. Both teams were legitimate contenders. Both had players with something to prove. Barnes was integral to Orlando's defensive strategy that season, tasked specifically with being a physical presence against Los Angeles' star players, with making the game uncomfortable, with turning basketball into something closer to combat. It was a role he was born for. In the first half, Barnes was everywhere. Physical, aggressive, present. He was talking, gesturing, initiating contact whenever the officials would allow it. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. Kobe played the first half the way he always played when the other team was trying to get into his head. He didn't avoid Barnes. He moved toward him. Every time there was a choice between taking an easier path and going directly through the source of friction, Kobe chose the friction. This was deliberate and it was psychological. He was communicating something through action rather than words. He was saying that whatever you are bringing, it is not affecting the calculation, not the physicality, not the talking, not the fake, not any of it. He was playing through Barnes like Barnes was a feature of the landscape rather than a threat within it. The second half is where the gap between the two players became impossible to ignore. Barnes's energy, which had been enormous and effective early, began to lose its edge. Not because Barnes stopped trying, but because the thing he was feeding off of, the reaction, the friction, the psychological back and forth, simply wasn't coming back to him. Kobe was absorbing everything Barnes threw at him and returning nothing. No frustration, no adjustment in body language, no change in expression. Just basketball, executed at an extraordinarily high level, with a kind of relentless mechanical focus that started to feel inhuman the longer it continued. There's a phenomenon that athletes talk about in combat sports, in football, in basketball, when you are hitting someone and they just keep coming, when you land what should be a significant blow and the other person looks at you like you've done nothing at all. It is one of the most psychologically destabilizing experiences in competitive sports, because the entire premise of physical and psychological pressure is that it costs something. It's supposed to register. When it doesn't, when the other person just continues forward like your best effort was background noise, something inside the aggressor starts to break. Barnes began experiencing this in the third quarter. Kobe scored 23 points in the second half. He did it without theatrics, without conversation, without a single moment where he appeared to be trying hard. That last part is what made it remarkable. Trying hard is visible. Great athletes often look like they're working, like they're reaching for something. What Kobe displayed that night was something rarer. Inevitability. He didn't look like he was overcoming anything because nothing in his body language suggested that there was anything to overcome. Barnes could have been a mannequin for all the psychological impact he was having on Kobe's performance. The fake remains the moment everyone remembers. The point in the game where the entire dynamic was defined in less than 2 seconds. Barnes has talked about it in interviews with remarkable candor. He didn't expect it to work, he said. Not exactly, but he expected something. Every player gives you something. A pulse, a tell, a human moment where the body reminds you that it's still connected to something vulnerable. What Kobe gave him was nothing, and that nothing hit Barnes harder than any physical response could have. You can counter aggression. You can match fire with fire. You cannot counter someone who has decided, at the deepest level of their psychology, that you simply don't matter enough to respond to. After the game, reporters asked Kobe about the moment. His answer was characteristically direct. He said he'd seen the fake coming from the moment Barnes set his feet. He said that by the time the ball was moving, he'd already processed that it wasn't going anywhere dangerous, that it was theater, and that reacting to theater was a choice he didn't need to make. He wasn't dismissive of Barnes. He wasn't condescending. He was simply describing a calculation he'd made in real time, the way a chess player might describe why they'd ignored a particular gambit. It was a move designed to provoke a specific response, and he'd chosen not to provide that response. Simple as that. What makes this story larger than basketball is what it says about the architecture of mental toughness and how it actually functions under pressure. Most people conceive of mental strength as something you summon in a critical moment, a decision you make when things get hard to push through anyway, to not give in, to hold the line. And there's real truth in that conception. But what Kobe represented was something different and something rarer. Mental strength not as a response to pressure, but as a condition that pressure moves through without finding purchase. The difference between someone who resists being rattled and someone who simply cannot be rattled by that category of thing, because they have already been to that place so many times in their mind that the real version of it contains no information their nervous system hasn't already processed and filed. Barnes went on to have a long and productive career. He was a valuable player, a legitimate tough guy, someone coaches trusted in high-stakes situations. Nothing about that moment diminished what he was. What it revealed was simply that there are levels, that the version of mental and physical preparation Kobe Bryant brought to a basketball court operated by different rules than what most players, even very good professional players, were working with. The fake traveled around the world. People who had never watched a full basketball game understood what they were seeing when they watched it, because it touched something universal. The moment when someone tries to make you small and you refuse, not through aggression, not through performance, but through a stillness so complete that their effort simply falls away and leaves them holding nothing. Every person watching had been in some version of that situation. Someone trying to make them flinch, someone testing them, someone looking for the crack, and everyone watching Kobe's face in that moment understood, on a level that didn't require any knowledge of basketball at all, that the right response sometimes isn't a response at all. Matt Barnes tried to get inside Kobe Bryant's head that night. What he found was a man who had already been to every dark place, had already sat with every version of fear and doubt and pressure, and had decided, long before that game, long before that play, long before that moment, that none of it was going to find a home there anymore. The fake was designed to expose something human. Kobe had spent his entire life making sure there was nothing left to expose. The ball moved toward his face and he didn't blink. 5 seconds later, the game had changed. Not the score, not the strategy, the game, the psychological reality of what was happening on that court. And everyone in that arena knew it, Barnes most of all.